9/11 operators of Reddit. What's the most disturbing or scary call you ever received?
I was a 911 operator in Mobile, Alabama, the day Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. We started getting lots of calls from New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast for some reason. I guess they started routing to us after all the 911 centers to the west of us started going down. Anyways, I got a call from a woman who said she was trapped in her house on Gordon Street between Florida and Law. I was confused at first because we have a Florida street in Mobile, and after checking and double-checking and not being able to find her address, I asked her what city she was calling from, and she said in New Orleans. I tried to route her to New Orleans 911 and New Orleans Fire Department, but could not get through. She started screaming and said the water was coming up into the attic where she was. I told her to find something heavy and break the attic vent out so she could get out onto her roof, but the vent was too small for her to crawl through. She sat down and started crying. I told her I would stay on the line with her for as long as she wanted me to. I stayed on the line and listened as she cried, prayed, cussed, and prayed some more. A little while later, I could hear her struggling to keep her head and phone above water. Then the phone went dead. To this day, I don't know if she lived or died. I quit 9/11 3 months after Katrina. Edit: I was a 911 operator for 9 years before Katrina hit. Edit 2: I got involved in 911 after doing some ride-alongs with the police department the summer before my junior year of high school. I started running the radio part-time on the weekends and during the summer when I was out of school, and moved into a full-time position after high school when a job opened up. It's not illegal for someone under the age of 18 to work at a 911 center, but I wasn't allowed to actually answer 911 calls without an APCO certified operator on the console with me until I was full-time and certified. It was also illegal for me to run the NCIC computer without being certified to do so, which I couldn't get certified to do until I was 18. I ran the EMS fire dispatch console for the county when I was part-time and got my certifications when I graduated. I was also a volunteer firefighter EMR during this time as well. Also not illegal and quite common in rural parts of Mississippi. And thanks for the gold, whoever you are. Although I don't feel right accepting a reward for something I did as part of my job 8 years ago, it is still appreciated.
1979, NYC. Got a call from a crying child, a little boy, saying his mom and dad were fighting and his dad said he was going to throw the mom out of the window. I could hear a terrible fight going on in the background. Woman screaming, things breaking, man yelling, etc. The poor kid didn't know his address. We didn't have the technology for call ID and would have to use reverse telephone books. A trace would take forever. Anyway, while I'm trying to get the address, I hear a horrific scream and glass breaking. A few seconds later, the other operators in the room are getting calls about a woman lying in the courtyard who came out of a window. Very sad. Worst of all is that I am sure someone else in this apartment building must have heard this fight, but no one called for help until it was too late. Poor kid. Working 911 in NYC during the 70s, 80s was a nightmare. The city had a very high crime rate and shit technology.
Wow, there's a lot of love for us lately. In another thread and an AMA that I did, I told my story of having to stay on the phone with a young man for about 40 minutes, maybe a little more, who had a very disturbed man break into his home, and with a loaded shotgun pointed at his face the entire time, demand that he call the police. He wanted a suicide by cop. I now realise that I didn't get overly detailed about it in my other mentionings of it, but this young man urinated himself, almost threw up, and was begging me to keep him alive. I haven't dreamt about it in a long time, it was several years ago, but it stuck with me.
Story 1. I once answered a call. 2 brothers were arguing over drinks, and one of their girlfriends or wives was over. Anyways, the brothers are drinking heavily, and one pulls out a gun and shoots the other one. When I received the call, I can barely get the guy's address over him screaming to send the paramedics. He keeps shouting, "Where the fuck are they?" While I am trying to stay calm and give CPR instructions and tell him to tell the female there to stop the bleeding. Firm pressure on the wound. Furthermore, medical cannot go in on scene until police have secured the firearm. Listening to the pain in someone's voice while they are screaming for help kind of haunts you. Both of them had to be around 30 years old. I couldn't imagine killing a family member. Edit. I know I hopped on the train late, but I have a few more if anyone wants them. Edit 2. Sorry, I was actually studying for finals. But here are some more. Story 2. So the next one I got, it was later at night, probably around 11:30 p.m. A female calls me screaming. She was yelling, "I'm burning!" So I told her to stop, drop, and roll, and once the flames were out, I told her to turn on the hose and put cool water on it until the paramedic got there. Once she was a little calmer, I was able to learn more about what happened. So she had been drinking with her boyfriend, and he got depressed, and decided tonight was the night he was going to commit suicide and kill his girlfriend. So in his intoxicated state, he found a gas can and started dumping it on himself and his girlfriend, and lit them both on fire. It also managed to catch the house fence yard on fire. Both of them survived. He got the worst of the burns. The house and fence had minimal damage. Story 3. This one was probably the hardest call I've ever taken. The phone rings, and there is a little girl, 8 to 10 years old. She is crying, "Daddy is dead." I can't calm her down at all. She keeps crying on the line. And in the background, I can also hear 2 other small girls crying. I was watching our call logs, and more calls are coming in. The same are for gunshots fired. What had happened is 3 guys had decided to break into a house and thought it was empty, so they rang the doorbell to make sure. The dad startled them, and they shot him. So the mother runs out to see what happened, and she got shot as well. The guys took off, leaving the 3 girls aged 8 to 12 to call 911. We are not allowed to disconnect a phone until police or EMS are on scene. So my heart was breaking for a small family that had lost both parents in one sad accident. I listened to the girl for 6 minutes and 37 seconds before police arrived on scene. The good news is that the mother lived.
My stepdad's a firefighter, and he told this story to me and my sister about 5 years ago, and it stuck with me. As a firefighter, he also attends car crashes to help cut people out, etc. The story he told us was that he was called to a lorry and car collision, which never end well, really. In the car were 3 adults and 1 young girl about 6 or 7. If memory serves me right, it was the family friend driving, with the others in the back with the little girl in the middle back seat. They crashed into a lorry and the car went under it, decapitating all the adults but missing the girl. She had to sit in that car, surrounded by the decapitated bodies of her family and friend for around 4 hours before they could get her out. He also told us about how when brains are splattered across the windscreen, it reminds him of raw mints. I guess when you deal with that stuff a lot, you grow kind of immune to it. Edit. Should clarify, a lorry is the British term for truck, like an 8-wheeler truck for transporting things.
I do actually work for a 911 center. The call that has stuck with me the most was a call for 2 UN conscious toddler twin girls. The mom called frantically because both weren't breathing. I stayed on the phone until help arrived, but there wasn't much we could do. The full story, which we rarely get by the way, is that the family went to bed early in the morning. The twins woke up and got up about 2 hours before mom. The 8-year-old took them to her bed and covered them with a blanket, causing them to both suffocate. The real disturbing part is that by the time the officers and paramedics got there, the mom had changed their clothes and rubbed baby oil on them to give them that life look. No criminal charges filed. Edit. I work for a fairly large department, so there are a lot of stories. I don't want to clog the comments, but it's not unusual for a seasoned dispatcher to take calls of people dying on the phone, suicides on the phone, listening to violent crimes like robberies in progress. It's the nature of the job. The only calls that really stick with me are the ones where children are hurt physically or mentally. Oh yay, and I heard a coworker take a call from a guy that was actively stabbing his girlfriend in the face. Okay, now that you've heard all this, go try to have a good day.
When I still lived in my hometown, I used to volunteer on the emergency services department. Being a tiny town, there was no full-time staff, so people in the town would receive proper training and volunteer for it. 2 incidents always stuck with me. One was a day when I was setting up for a CPR training course for teens. The station was silent as I was working, until almost every alarm suddenly started going off. Fire, EMS, I could hear the RCMP alarm going off across the street. The radio starts buzzing, and I can hear a Delta call come in for a house nearby, Delta being the 2nd highest level. I knew the family, kind people. Mum had been downstairs making dinner, and her son was getting ready to go to Scouts. He had tripped and hung himself by the kerchief. She didn't find him until it was too late. I remember standing in front of the radio in horror as I could hear her screaming in the background of a radio call as one of the guys was radioing in that they were coming into the big city with a high priority call. My father is on both fire and EMS and was there. He said that all he could think the entire time was, "We left muddy footprints on their clean carpet." He called my mum in tears, asking her to hurry by and to vacuum it up before the family got home. The other is less tragic and more just nerve-wracking. Was driving in from school one day, radio goes off. I hear the words, "We have a potential echo level call. Prepare for potential evacuations, west side." It was November, and usually there would be a thick blanket of snow. So far, there was none. Someone, in their infinite stupidity, had thrown a lit cigarette butt out of their car window into a nearby ditch. Nothing but farm fields for miles outside our town, and all of it was on fire. It took the fire departments of 3 towns and some pretty amazing bravery to get that fire under control. It took 2 days, and by the end of it, 2 farmsteads had burnt down, and our town was under threat of evacuation for the whole time.
My mom was a 911 dispatcher in the early 90s. I was 5 years oldish in Washington State. When I got older, I remember asking her about some of the calls that she could still recall. One in particular was pretty bad. She was working one year on Halloween night, and around 10 or 11 p.m., she had a call come in that a couple guys were driving around town with a dummy or something dragging behind their truck. The dummy was falling apart, and pieces of clothing, plastic were being torn off and scattered around the city. Being Halloween, it seemed like a prank, but she had a patrol car try to find and stop the truck. As time goes by, more and more people started to call in about it. Eventually, the patrol car caught up with the truck, and it turns out that it was a person. The guys had gone to a store earlier, and when they left, they had backed their truck into an elderly man whose clothes got caught in the rear bumper or whatnot. The 2 guys never even knew that they were dragging around another human being all across town for miles. The elderly man had passed away, and those pieces of clothing scattered around town. Was his clothing, flesh, and body parts? Still gives me chills.
I was a criminal justice major in college, and as one of my summer jobs, internships, I was a non-emergency dispatcher at a 911 center. I was surprised about the number of emergency calls I got on the non-emergency lines. A couple of examples. An old guy mad at the minority kids playing in the street in front of his house threatened to go outside with his shotgun and confront their mom because the police were taking too long to come, answer his complaint. A lady called saying she found a guy passed out in her driveway and wanted to know if she should ignore it or if we should send an ambulance. We sent an ambulance. The one that sticks with me, though, is an elderly lady calling saying that her grandson and husband were burning trash in the backyard and something exploded and her husband was on fire. Her grandson was 8 to 9 years old and couldn't do anything about it. When the fire department got there, they said his skin was like melted plastic, and as soon as they tried to get him on the backboard, it came off exposing all his organs, etc. He died en route to the hospital. Grandson watched everything.
I am not a 911 operator. However, one of my clients is. I am a massage therapist. One day she came in to see me and seemed very depressed and angry. I asked what was wrong, and she told me sometimes she wished she could reach through the phone and strangle some of the callers. Then she explained to me why. She said a woman called 911 saying that her baby was barely breathing and was turning blue. The woman sounded bored, uninterested. My friend said to her she could talk the woman though, baby CPR, so she could try to save the baby's life in the meantime before the ambulance arrived. The woman said she didn't want to do the CPR. My client kept repeating to her, "I can help you save your baby's life. Please just listen to me and go in with the baby and follow my directions." And the woman was very adamant about not wanting to go back to the baby and do this. So my friend stays on the phone with her while she waits for the ambulance. And the woman says she went back to check on the baby and thinks the baby has stopped breathing altogether, still sounding bored or like she was just really fucked up on drugs. My friend said she told her boss, or whoever would need to be told about this, and then had to take a break and go outside and cry. She just couldn't believe a mother would not even attempt to save her child, or that she could sound so uninterested in the child dying in the next room. So yeah, she said she wishes sometimes she could reach through the phone and slap some sense into people. Or at the very least yell at them when they don't want to help.
I answered a call from a guy who was screaming about how the relative of his, that he found outside, was bleeding from the head and was laying on the ground. It was a call that was way out there in the boondocks, so I was going to be on the line with this guy for a while. It wasn't helping that he was freaking out and yelling at me nearly the entire time. When I was going through questions with him about the patient's condition, he was yelling, "He's bleeding from the head! Send help!" We already had an ambulance and police and fire on the way. Suddenly, during the assessment, he yells, "He's not breathing!" At that point, I do my best to calm him down and guide him through CPR instructions. He did a very good job, and the patient started breathing again after about 300 compressions. Once that happened, I immediately went to the control bleeding protocol and asked him to get a dry, clean towel or cloth and to apply it to the wound on his head. The guy would not do it. At this point, he was an emotional wreck and didn't want to leave him no matter how much I tried to talk to and reason with him. I was practically begging the guy to go get something to control the bleeding. He kept saying over and over that he didn't want to leave him. After a while, the police showed up on scene first. I asked him if they were there, and he said yes. Just before I was about to hang up and let them talk to him, I heard a police officer say, "Sir, I need you step away from that gun on the ground." That call gave me chills. Edit. The guy that was found bleeding from the head shot himself.
I once took a call from a kidnapping victim who jumped out of a moving car in an office park. She had no idea where she was, and I couldn't get a valid location on her cell phone. This was in 2004. Only the nearest cell tower. Usually, I would ask a caller in her situation to start looking in mailboxes for mail with an address on the envelope. But this was an office park with mail slots that she couldn't access. She was literally running for her life while I was on the phone with her, hiding behind dumpsters and bushes while the kidnappers patrolled the office park. The terror in her voice was gut-wrenching. She had already been beaten, and she was afraid that if they found her, they would kill her. After about 5 minutes of this terrifying call, she was finally able to find a business sign on one of the windows in the complex. I frantically searched for the business address, and the radio dispatcher aired the location, to which at least a dozen officers responded. They found the suspect vehicle pretty quickly, and a short foot chase ensued. K9 officer ended that in no time. The first officer to reach the caller ordered a victim's advocate because of the condition she was in. I had to take a few minutes off after that call.
Wow, the murder one is harrowing. Reminds me of the one that I didn't see, but rather saw the investigation later a few hours after it happened. I was at my friend's house that night. He lived about 4 to 5 blocks away from me, so I walked there, heard the sirens whiz by at about 11:30 p.m. that night. We lived in a rougher part of the city, so we didn't really think much into it. Sirens are heard there all the time. I left at about 2 a.m. that night. I was walking to my street and noticed the roads are closed off. I had to detour about another 5 blocks east, then another 5 blocks back to my house. A little curious, why would the police rope off such a large area? What the hell happened a couple of hours ago? I go to the top of my street where I can still see the lights flashing from the cop car in the intersection. I see a sheet covering what I think is a body. All I can remember thinking is, holy shit, someone got hit and died. Right at the top of my street, the same street I had to walk to in the morning to catch the bus to school. Work. I then look around, see another sheet there too. Shit. 2 people lost their lives, but what sticks out more is the boot that is just sitting there across the street. The sheet was on the other side of the street. The boot was on the side of the street closest to me. That this person got hit so hard, their boot flew off their feet. It's around winter time, so I am assuming they were tied relatively tight. Found out in the morning that this fellow was hit a block east of my street. 2 or more people were street racing from the rail tracks onto a straight stretch of road that equals to about a quarter mile. I also found out that it was only one person who was killed that night. He was hit so hard that he was split in half. One person stopped and was arrested, most likely the one that hit the person and was in shock about it. The other person was never caught. Although I can't easily find the article about the crash, I did find one about one of the accused going to trail for the charges, which describes what happened that night.